Okay, hi everyone. It's been such a long time since I did a stock analysis, and today, okay, I have something very, very special for all of you. I'm not going to analyze just one, but actually two companies, and I'm sure you know about these two companies. They are Intel and AMD. All right, so before I go on, I would just like to do a disclaimer. The opinions in this sharing is purely of my own. They are derived from the information that I have done research on, and they may not be fully exhaustive. So before you take any opinion and do your investment, okay, please do your own due diligence. This is super, super important. Okay, what happened to Intel? I'm sure all of you know 2 or 3 weeks ago, Intel actually dropped 16, almost 17% in one day. What happened exactly? What happened was actually this, okay? Intel actually had a delay in its 7nm newest product. And because of this, the market had a very, very big reaction. Articles were coming up with headlines that say, wow, Intel is gone. Intel, this will allow AMD to dominate. Intel is getting from bad to worse. Intel is going down. But I just want to check, okay, is Intel still investable in this point of time? Is it a good opportunity to get in, or should we avoid Intel at all costs? Why? Because it is going down. Before I carry on, I would just like to just break down how I would like to analyze this whole issue of Intel being investable or not. I'm going to go into the product lines of Intel and AMD, and then from a micro view, I'm going to zoom up a little bit and I will look at Intel and AMD at the company level. Finally, of course, no investor will go in without a proper valuation, and I will also share my valuation of Intel and AMD with you. So this is a table, this is a summary of the products that Intel and AMD makes. One very, very interesting thing to take note is that, okay, the products you see here, Intel makes all of them. But for AMD actually avoids making memory solutions, some programmable chips, and boards. All right, boards, I will explain what are the boards later. They are not your wooden boards. No, no, no. They are actually the computer motherboards that are really required for the computer system or the server system. Okay, before let me just go into detail what is a CPU. In fact, this is one of the most highly competitive products that AMD and Intel has. So what is this CPU? It is actually this brain of the computer. If your computer does not have a CPU, your computer will not work. All right. So how do they actually look at this CPU? They actually look at this thing called the core and the thread. What is a core? You can think of it as an engine of a CPU. Basically, the more engines means that this CPU will be more powerful. What is a thread? It is actually the number of connections that feed data to the core. Typically, for each core, there are two threads, and you can see just a very quick Google check on the pricing and the number of cores and threads that each company has in terms of Intel CPU and AMD CPU. You can see that Intel's latest CPU here, the i9 core, actually has 8 cores and 16 threads, and it is selling for $728 Sing. Let us take a look at AMD's product. AMD, wow, it is cheaper, $639, but they boast a CPU of 12 cores and 24 threads. So does it mean that AMD is actually selling a higher quality product at a lower price? Let's find out. Let's find out. I'm not too sure. Is there something more to it? I have actually done a lot of research, about the 7nm, and there are some articles, there are quite a lot of articles that say actually, even in terms of the nanometers, okay, the smaller the better, yes, but right now the rage is for the 7 nanometers. That was what caused Intel's share price to drop. But studies have shown that Intel, even though they have a slightly bigger chip, the 10nm, all right, the density, that means the number of components on this CPU or the chip is actually higher. Okay, when you will see TSMC 7nm process, okay, what happened is that AMD actually got this company called TSMC Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company to actually manufacture their chips for them. AMD does the designing, TSMC does the manufacturing. Studies have shown that Intel's 10nm supposedly bigger chip has a higher density, and we all know that, okay, usually the higher density the better. It means that the performance will be better. And there are articles that says that, okay, Intel's core, all right, is even 30% faster than AMD's 7nm. All right, so is this true? Actually, I'm not too sure. Okay, so I went to do a lot more checks, and this is what one of the websites provided. They actually done a lot of tests on each thread, all right, each core, each thread, and they find out, okay, it is very interesting to know that AMD, or the top performers, is dominated by Intel. AMD is quite the next one, the first AMD CPU or the chip that I see is an AMD Ryzen 7. All right, so is there a clue? Is this a indicative test to say that, oh, Intel is definitely better, or is AMD better? Let us see. Okay, so now we know that there is a very high possibility that although AMD has more cores, it is smaller. All right, Intel's chip, when we talk about performance per core or per thread, it doesn't lose out to AMD. So what is the implication here? The implication here is that, okay, if you are using the chip for very, very high performance, you will need a higher end chip. But to be honest, to be realistic, how many applications are there that require such high-end performance? The answer is really not many. If you are using your computer, if you are expecting your equipment to just do the everyday tasks, the performance, you do not need very, very high performance chips. All right, and it is very interesting to note that in the mid performance sector, that means the applications that do not need the super high-end performance, all right, Intel is actually leading. Why is that so? Because Intel has contracts with Dell, HP, Lenovo. A total of 39% of their revenue comes from these three companies. And I just want to just pose a question here. Okay, for those of you who work in the office, okay, what is the computer or the laptop brand that you're using in an office? Why is that so? All right, why do these companies, what do your workplace give you? I'm pretty sure it is either Dell, HP, or Lenovo, and all these use Intel chips. So why does this company, does your workplace actually give you these three? Let us investigate, right? So Intel is definitely the dominant player in this mid-performance sector, which is very, very widely used by officers, most businesses. All right, the high-end performers, they are ready for gaming, video processing, video editing. All right, so what is this advantage that Intel has in terms of its products that dominates this mid-performance market? All right, the answer is actually very simple. If you study the product portfolio of Intel, you will realize that Intel makes a lot of components that almost every PC, laptop, or the server system needs. They not only manufacture the CPU, they manufacture the memory, other chips that actually allow the PC or the laptop to work as a system to function seamlessly. And therefore, when it comes to the PC, a laptop, or even the server system, Intel has a very, very huge advantage, because when you combine all these components together, things like compatibility and the stability of this entire system becomes super, super important. All right. And there is actually one more trick up Intel's sleeve. For every chip that we buy, we actually cannot use the chip alone. You actually have to mount this chip onto this thing called a motherboard. This is how it looks like. And if you see the squarish shape over here, you have to mount this chip on this board. Whatever chip you buy, whether you buy an AMD or Intel chip, you have to get the board and you have to mount it there. All right. And the thing is this, AMD and Intel's, their CPU, their chips, they are not interchangeable. That means if I buy a board that has always been using AMD, if I decide to switch over to Intel, I cannot just throw away my AMD chip and buy a new Intel chip and just mount it there. It does not work that way. What happens is that I will have to throw away my original motherboard, which was working perfectly fine, and chances are I will have to change the other components as well. So there is a very, very high cost if you want to just change the CPU. All right. And as the market leader in this segment, there are more Intel compatible motherboards in the market. What this means is that it makes the repair work a lot easier. Let's say if your motherboard breaks down or if the chip breaks down, you will have to go back to Intel compatible chips, Intel compatible boards, and because there are more in the market, it is easier to source, it is easier to replace it compared to if you are using an AMD chip. All right, this is really one of the main reasons why your office, maybe your company uses things like Dell, HP, and Lenovo. Because why? The spare parts are readily available. It is very stable. All the parts are compatible, and they don't have to fine tune a lot of things. Even if one part breaks down, they can just take another part quite easily. This is something that AMD is unable to provide to its customers at this moment of time. All right. So does this mean that AMD is definitely at the losing end? Actually, no, because AMD has been marketing itself as a very high-end chip, as a very high-end performer, but at quite low prices. So AMD is actually having quite a lot of success catering to things like servers. All right, Intel has its servers. All right, but increasingly, AMD is winning, is scoring quite lucrative contracts, providing chips to the higher performance markets. Example like your gaming. All right. In fact, Sony is accounts for 10% of AMD's revenue. AMD has also won contracts with Microsoft to provide Xbox with their chips, and even Sony PS4, one of the best-selling video game consoles in the world, uses AMD chips. And AMD also won the right to supply the chips to the Sony PlayStation 5, which is the next up and coming video game console. All right, and also the latest generation, the next generation of the Microsoft Surface Pro laptops. Okay, so while Intel is very stable in the mid-range market, AMD is really making a lot of waves in this high-end performance market. All right, so the winner here is AMD. So then we come back to our original question. What is so special about these 7 nanometer chips? It is supposedly supposed to have more electric components. Because of this, it allows the chip to have better performance for less power. And therefore, one key area where this 7nm chip shine is in mobile devices, all right, such as your phones, your laptops. All right, but what are the potential weaknesses of this 7nm? Because they are new technology, and new technology tend to be more expensive. But over the time, as AMD as TSMC actually really make their process more efficient, this price may lower. But right now, it may be more expensive. All right, they not, all right, and they may not be suitable for some applications. And because it is a new technology, there may be some integration issues. Okay, so therefore the conclusion is this: in terms of technology, yes, AMD is indeed ahead in terms of manufacturing, not the design, but in terms of the manufacturing. All right, so this is an overview of the product line that AMD and Intel offers. So let's look at these two companies at the company level. Right now, we know that from the example I showed just now, we know that Intel's products are priced slightly higher than AMD. So what does this mean for Intel? All right. For this, we can see that for Intel, the top one is Intel. Intel enjoys almost 30% net margin. What this means is that for every $100 that they collect in sales, for every $100 of chips that they sell, they keep almost $30. All right, after paying for the salaries, after paying for the manufacturing costs, after paying for the raw materials. And look at AMD, they only get to keep almost $8 for every $100 they sell. So we can see that in terms of margin wise, AMD is really far behind Intel. And this is no surprise because Intel is trying to incorporate more power, more performance, but selling cheaper. Definitely something has to go, and it is really this net margin. It means that they are really spending a lot of money trying to manufacture, trying to do research, but they're not keeping so much money. And this is very important because it means for Intel, these are the points that follows whenever a company has a higher margin than its competitor. For Intel can afford to engage in a price war with AMD. It can afford to spend more on R&D, afford to outsource manufacturing. Okay, right now they have a issue with manufacturing. And if they decide to outsource this because of their superior margin, they will lower their margin a little bit, but they can afford to do it and solve this problem immediately. So this is a matter of whether they want to do it, not whether they have to do it or not. All right, that's why Intel is still, trying to decide. They can also afford to absorb the loss of some major customers and afford to incentivize their distributors more. So inferior net margin will also mean that AMD have to keep coming up with cutting edge products and sell them cheaper. All right. And because AMD is not the market leader, the supply chain is very dependent on manufacturers like TSMC, and they have to, because AMD, they are not outsourcing their manufacturing to TSMC. If TSMC decide to up the price of their manufacturing, AMD will have to pay. And if, let's say, AMD loses a major customer now, because their revenue is not a lot, it will affect them a lot. And because their net margin is really quite low, it will affect them doubly hard. And because Intel is the market leader now, Intel actually dominates the distribution chains, and AMD will have to pay catch up if Intel decides to shift the distribution chain model to actually get more benefits out of it. All right. Okay. Even when we look at the assets, we can see that, okay, both companies, they are relatively stable. They have more assets than liabilities. This is a good thing. And because Intel has almost 3 to 4 times as much cash, they can do a lot more than AMD. Okay. So we have seen the net margin. Okay, there is one more thing that Intel can do. Actually, last year, Intel actually spent a sum of 13.57 billion just doing share repurchase. And if Intel is really in trouble, they can actually, at the snap of their fingers, activate $13.5 billion by just reducing their share repurchase. It can be up to this amount. So Intel, in terms of finances as a company, Intel is way ahead compared to AMD. This is undeniable. All right. So what is my conclusion here? While yes, some issues that Intel has suffered actually allowed AMD to catch up, but to say that this 7nm delay will cause Intel to fall totally is actually quite a far stretch. And while AMD is continuing to secure the big customers, and at the same time, Intel has lost some big customers, in terms of system compatibility and stability, okay, because of this superiority that Intel has, it has a very high switching cost. And as the market leader, Intel has a lot of influence over the industry standards, which can really severely affect AMD. All right, so this means that AMD still has a lot of catch up to do. All right. So when I do my valuation, okay, this one, I use the discounted cash flow, and I'm assuming, all right, from Guru Focus, I see that the free cash flow has been growing at 8.8% annually for the past 10 years. Okay, and I'm using the discounted cash flow, using free cash flow as a benchmark. All right, based on an 8.8% annual growth for the next 10 years. And when it reaches the terminal stage, meaning to say when Intel has fully become a mature company, the growth rate drops to 2.5% for the next 20 years. All right, the fair value of Intel is actually 76.84. Right now, it is $48, $49. So we have a 35, almost 36% margin of safety or potential upside. Okay, let us look at what happens for AMD. AMD, all right, let's say if because AMD has been growing quite well for the past few years, okay, if I assume a 40% growth rate in their free cash flow, 40% annually for the next 10 years, and then same as Intel, when they after the 10 years they become a very fully mature company. After that, for the next 20 years, they grow at 2.5% annually. The fair value of AMD is $66. And we know that in AMD is actually trading at 80, slightly more than $80. And therefore, I know that AMD at this price now, 80 over dollars, is really severely overvalued. All right. And I've done actually some research. AMD's free cash flow rate is actually growing at a median rate of 14% per year. Right now over here, I over catered for this growth. I catered it at 40%, 40. If I were to adjust it back to 14%, the fair value of AMD really drops to $11.54. This is more than 600% more overvalued. And all right, will AMD really grow at 40% per year? I really do not know. Therefore, I really know that it is definitely overvalued, and AMD is really not the best investment now. Okay, in fact, personally, I've invested in Intel, okay, because it is undervalued, and I really believe that it can still grow, it can still get its act together. All right. Okay, so that's my opinion, but how about you? Okay, would you choose Intel or would you choose AMD in the long run? So let us know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you again next time. Bye bye.